There comes a point when the world you used to belong to stops making sense, not because it broke, but because you woke up. And the moment you begin to see clearly, you stop fitting into the roles, the games, the illusions everyone else still treats as real. Most people call this losing yourself. Alan Watts would call it finally meeting who you were all along, the only real ability, seeing things exactly as they are. Here is the truth most people never want to face. Nothing is more dangerous, more disruptive, or more unsettling than a person who sees reality without distortion. The awakened do not add labels, stories, or emotional coloring to what they perceive. They don't interpret through fear or desire. They don't filter through ego. They simply see. And this is precisely what makes them look strange, cold, or different to those still trapped in their mental projections. In everyday life, the average person does not meet reality. They meet their thoughts about reality. They meet a coworker and instantly categorize them as a threat. They meet a stranger and project insecurity or fantasy onto them. They meet authority and see not a human, but an imagined source of danger. Their perception is not perception. It is psychological reflex. They react not to the world, but to the movie playing inside their own head. This is why Alan Watts said, "You don't actually see or hear the person. You see your concept of them." Most people are addicted to this inner commentary, a non-stop narrator who explains, judges, predicts, and dramatizes everything. The tragedy is that they mistake the narrator for truth, so they never see the world directly. They only see the lens, but the awakened person has broken the lens. They see the boss not as a threat, but as a nervous man hiding behind authority. They see the angry friend not as a villain, but as someone drowning in their own fear. They see the manipulator not as powerful, but as deeply insecure. This clarity terrifies people because it strips away the illusions they rely on to feel secure. It exposes pretenses, collapses social games, and reveals the artificial nature of status, fear, and identity. And here is the psychological core. Clear seeing destroys every mechanism society uses to control people. Fear, shame, ego, desire, comparison. When you see things as they are, you cannot be bullied by appearances, seduced by status, or manipulated by insecurity. You become free from the collective dream. That freedom is why awakened people are quietly feared and silently respected. Most people don't see reality. They see their thoughts about reality. The human mind has a primitive habit. It labels before it looks. Within seconds of meeting someone, the average person has already created an entire psychological script. Rich, poor, safe, dangerous, attractive, boring, above me, beneath me. They aren't seeing a living being. They're seeing a projection stitched together from fear, memory, insecurity, and desire. This is why most social anxiety is self-generated. People aren't afraid of others. They're afraid of their own imagination. When you meet your boss and immediately think, "He can fire me," you've stopped seeing a person and started seeing a threat. When you meet someone attractive and think, "They're out of my league," you're not seeing them. You're seeing your own inadequacy. Most people live inside this hallucination, treating their mental images as reality, and then wonder why they feel trapped, tense, or misunderstood. Alan Watts summarized it perfectly. You don't see the person. You see your concept of the person. And the psychological mechanism behind this is brutal. Concepts are always safer than reality. Concepts don't change, don't surprise you, and don't require vulnerability. Labeling someone annoying, toxic, or dangerous is easier than facing the uncertainty of who they actually are. But the cost of this self-protective habit is enormous. You lose access to truth, you stop responding to life, and instead respond to your fears and fantasies. The awakened person breaks this entire chain. They meet someone and see a shifting mosaic of emotions, insecurities, hopes, wounds a real, breathing human being. They aren't blinded by storylines. They don't react to imagined danger. They don't elevate or diminish anyone. They simply see what is there. And this terrifies people, because when someone sees clearly, they become immune to social roles. They don't flinch before authority. They don't melt under flattery. They don't get trapped in hierarchy. They've stepped out of the psychological game entirely. And here's the uncomfortable truth. When you meet someone who sees reality instead of projections, you feel naked because all your masks stop working. Seeing through money, borders, religion, and power. Most people don't realize how much of their life is built on collective hallucinations. Money, for example, is nothing but paper and digits, yet entire civilizations panic, worship, fight, and sacrifice their lives for it. Borders are imaginary lines humans drew on a map, yet people kill each other defending those lines as if mountains would collapse without them. Religions begin as poetic metaphors, then harden into dogmas that split families and justify wars. And a power. It exists only because people agree to play along. The moment the agreement breaks, the power dissolves like smoke. The awakened person sees straight through all of this. They still use money, carry passports, or walk through airports, but they no longer kneel before these inventions. They understand what they are, useful fictions, not absolute truths. And this clarity removes the emotional charge that controls most people's behavior. While others are terrified of losing status, job titles, salaries, or social approval, the awakened person cannot be manipulated through these levers of fear. You can't threaten someone with the loss of something they were never psychologically owned by in the first place. Psychologically, this is devastating to the system. Society depends on people not seeing clearly, on them believing the myth that money equals worth, that borders equal identity, that groups equal truth, that institutions equal morality. Once you see the strings, the puppet show collapses. Alan Watts said it simply: every social structure depends absolutely on people not seeing clearly. And when you do see clearly, you become ungovernable, not rebellious, but inwardly free. This is why awakened individuals are often labeled dangerous, unserious, or strange. Their freedom threatens the stability of the collective narrative. They're the ones smiling while others are panicking about interest rates. They're the ones calm when everyone else is inflamed by ideology. They're the ones who cannot be recruited into tribal hatred because they see the shared human fear beneath all sides. And here's the cold truth most won't admit. A person who sees through the illusion cannot be controlled, and every system fears the uncontrollable. The space between stimulus and response. Here is the psychological divide that separates ordinary minds from awakened ones. When something happens, an insult, a rejection, a crisis, the average person reacts instantly. They are a machine triggered by stimuli. Someone disrespects them, they explode. Someone ignores them, they panic. Someone challenges them, they defend. There is no choice, only reflex. Their emotions drag them by the throat, and their identity is glued to every passing impulse. But the awakened person has a built-in gap, a moment of pure awareness between what happens and what they do next. When anger rises, they see it rise. When fear spikes, they watch the body tense. When someone attacks them verbally, they feel the sting, but it doesn't hijack their mind. They are the witness, not the reaction. And within that small fraction of a second lies absolute freedom. Alan Watts described this beautifully. There's a space between stimulus and response. In that space, there's freedom. Most people never experience this space because they don't know it exists. They live inside their emotional storms as if the storm is them. The awakened person stands on the shore, watching waves crash without being swept away. In behavioral psychology, this is called response inhibition, but awakening pushes it far deeper into existential territory. It is not self-control. It is self-awareness so sharp that manipulation no longer works. Try to provoke an awakened person with ego games, emotional bait, or social pressure, and you will fail. They see the hook before the worm. This unnerves people. Someone who doesn't react the way you expect becomes unpredictable, even threatening. When an awakened person responds to aggression with calmness, to sarcasm with silence, to manipulation with transparency, the manipulator panics because their tools fall useless to the floor. And here lies the real reason awakened individuals are treated as weird or cold. They cannot be controlled by emotional triggers. They have reclaimed the one thing almost no one possesses sovereignty over their inner state. That half second of awareness, it is the end of being a puppet and the beginning of being a free human being. They cannot be manipulated by fear, desire, or ego. If you want to understand why awakened people disturb society so deeply, start here. They are immune to the three levers that control nearly all human behavior: fear, desire, and ego validation. These are the buttons institutions, corporations, religions, and even personal relationships press to shape behavior. And for most people, those buttons work flawlessly. Advertising whispers, "You're not enough by this." Politics screams, "Be afraid, trust us." Relationships plead, "Prove your worth, don't lose me." Culture demands, "Succeed, or you're nobody." And almost everyone obeys. Not because they want to, but because the mind is conditioned to respond automatically. Threaten someone's identity, beauty, status, or security, and they collapse instantly into compliance. But the awakened individual, they no longer fear losing an identity they know is not real. They no longer chase validation from a world they've stopped mistaking for a judge. And they no longer tremble at the thought of death, rejection, or instability, because they've seen through the illusion of control. Alan Watts put it plainly, "You become like water flowing around obstacles. Water cannot be bullied, bribed, or intimidated. It moves freely because it never resists what is." In psychological terms, awakened people are low reactive, internally anchored, and non-dependent on external approval. You cannot frighten them into obedience or tempt them with status. They don't care about being admired. They don't crumble when criticized. They don't cling to certainty. And that terrifies anyone who benefits from control. Try to manipulate them with guilt, they see the hook. Try to seduce them with praise, they hear the agenda. Try to dominate them with anger. Their calmness exposes your insecurity. This is why many people experience discomfort around awakened individuals, not because the awakened are hostile, but because they're uncontrollable. Their freedom reveals everyone else's prison. Their clarity exposes the invisible chains others have spent their lives ignoring. The awakened person doesn't rebel. They simply stop obeying illusions. And that, in any society built on control, is the ultimate threat. Their presence becomes a mirror exposing others' inner prison. The most unsettling thing about an awakened person isn't what they say, it's what they don't need to say. Their presence alone functions like a mirror stripped of distortion. While ordinary people unconsciously collude in maintaining each other's illusions, the awakened individual breaks the silent agreement. They don't participate in the shared performance. They don't reinforce others' masks. They don't pretend not to notice what is painfully obvious. And that alone is enough to make many people deeply uncomfortable. Psychologically, most social interactions are co-regulated fantasies, subtle exchanges of approval, status, self-protection, and emotional camouflage. People smile when they're anxious, brag when they're insecure, and intellectualize when they're lonely. Everyone plays along. You pretend your life is fine, and I'll pretend mine is too. But the awakened do not play this game because they no longer depend on social validation. Without trying, they see the fear behind the confidence, the longing behind the anger, the insecurity behind the arrogance. Their attention pierces through the persona, straight into the emotional truth, and this clear seeing feels invasive to those still hiding from themselves. Alan Watts described this perfectly. Their presence reveals your prison to you, not because they judge you, but because they don't join your self-deception. Their stillness makes your restlessness obvious. Their honesty makes your excuses echo louder. Their calmness makes your anxiety impossible to ignore. And their authenticity reminds you of the effort it takes to maintain your own facade. The common reaction: people project. They accuse the awakened of being cold, arrogant, weird, or too intense. But what they're actually reacting to is the discomfort of being seen without their mask. Some run away. Some become defensive. Some become hostile. A few, however, the ones ready to evolve, feel something else. Relief. Finally. Someone who isn't pretending. Finally. A space where nothing needs to be performed. The awakened person doesn't expose others to be superior. Their presence simply reflects truth. And truth to a mind built on illusion always feels like threat before it feels like liberation. They accept not knowing, and it destroys every ideological battle. One of the most radical traits of an awakened mind is its complete comfort with uncertainty. Ordinary people crave clarity, final answers, and firm categories: right versus wrong, good versus evil, my side versus your side. This psychological rigidity comes from fear. The ego survives by clinging to certainty. It feels threatened by anything that cannot be neatly labeled or controlled. That's why most people demand others to pick a side, choose a belief, or declare a stance. Certainty gives them the illusion of safety, but the awakened person no longer lives inside that illusion. They have seen through the mental machinery that manufactures identity, ideology, and belief. Instead of forcing the world into categories, they let contradictions exist without collapsing them. They see complexity where others see conflict. They see nuance where others see enemies. And this inability or refusal to join polarized thinking infuriates people who depend on their beliefs for emotional stability. For example, when a political argument erupts, most people want validation for their narrative. They want allies. They want enemies. They want the awakened person to reinforce their worldview. But the awakened simply says something like, "Both sides are afraid." That single sentence shatters the entire battlefield. Because it doesn't support any ideology, it exposes the emotional engine beneath all ideologies: fear. Alan Watts captured this beautifully. They can hold contradictions without needing to resolve them. This isn't indecision. It's freedom from the compulsive need to be right. The awakened person doesn't rely on beliefs to feel secure. Their security comes from presence, not position. Their identity doesn't depend on belonging to a tribe. They don't need to defend a worldview because they've seen that worldviews are mental constructs, not reality itself. And that's why they are so dangerous to every system built on tribalism, nationalism, or dogma. When someone refuses to pick a side, the entire war loses its fuel. The awakened person stands outside the game not as a spectator, but as someone who sees the game's structure too clearly to be manipulated by it. To a mind addicted to certainty, this looks like betrayal. To a mind seeking truth, this looks like liberation. Seeing clearly makes them the greatest threat to any system. Nothing unsettles society more than a person who sees through its illusions. Throughout history, the most dangerous individuals were never the armed rebels. They were the ones who exposed the invisible structures everyone else unconsciously obeyed. Socrates questioned the foundations of Athenian morality and was executed. Jesus challenged the authority of religious dogma and was crucified. Mansur al-Hallaj spoke openly about unity with the divine and was dismembered. Giordano Bruno refused to shrink truth to please the church and was burned alive. None of them led armies. Their weapon was clarity. Because every system, political, economic, religious, cultural, depends entirely on collective belief. Borders only exist because people agree to pretend. Money only works because we treat paper and numbers as sacred. Social roles have power because everyone performs them. When someone sees through these constructs, their existence becomes destabilizing, not because they fight the system, but because they stop believing in it. Alan Watts said it plainly. Clear seeing is inherently threatening to those who prefer comfortable delusion. When you see money as a social fiction, you can still use it, but you no longer worship it. When you see nationalism as imaginary lines on a map, you can still have a passport, but you don't hate strangers for being born elsewhere. When you see religious dogma as a story, you can still appreciate its wisdom, but you can't be manipulated by fear of hell. And this terrifies people who rely on collective illusions to feel safe, important, or righteous. To the awakened, life becomes fluid. They move through systems without being owned by them. They listen, but aren't indoctrinated. They participate, but aren't controlled. Their mere presence exposes the prison everyone else is living inside, the prison built out of fear, meaning, identity, and unquestioned assumptions. That's why awakened people are often labeled dangerous, rebellious, irresponsible, or crazy. Society punishes those it cannot predict, cannot control, and cannot indoctrinate. The awakened don't need to rebel. Their clarity is the rebellion. When the illusions fall away, you don't become special. You simply become free. Free from the roles you were assigned, the fears you inherited, and the systems that needed you blind. You may lose acceptance, approval, even entire worlds. But what you gain is something no system can touch. Your clarity, your peace, your true self. And that is the quiet revolution that changes everything.